Our independence is our strength, and only you make that possible. By making a tax-deductible donation to the Australia Institute today, you'll help fund the research changing Australia for the better. You can give to our end of financial year appeal now by visiting our website, australiainstitute.org.au, or via the link in the show notes.
Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the Senior Content Producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm talking to our Chief Economist, Greg Jericho. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Elinor. Not as always, I'm back. I wasn't here last week, but I'm back, and well done to Matt Grudnoff for taking over the chair. And
yep, he held down the fort.
He did.
Yep.
While I was up in Brisbane getting accosted by security guards.
Yeah, how was your time at the energy or gas conference?
Yeah, the Australian Energy Producers Conference. My credentials certainly were double-checked by security who didn't like me hanging out with environmentalists, but it was wonderful. It's a different world up there.
Yep. Climate
change should all be solved by if we can just have a bit more gas, and everyone using more energy is actually a good thing. And also, according to the head of Santos, Victoria is like North Korea, and it'd be better for everybody if our governance and tax arrangements were like PNG rather than Australia. So, yeah, really interesting.
Okay.
A bit eye-opening. But they do a good lunch, so
that's good at least.
It all cancels out.
Yeah, well, back to the world in which you're used to, economics. We've got GDP figures out this week, which I'm sure you're excited about.
Yeah, big GDP figures, the March quarter, so that covers January, February, March of this year. And as regular listeners will know, but if you're a first-time listener, welcome. But GDP basically counts everything that is produced in Australia, everything that is consumed, every bit of income, anything that requires changing of money.
Yep.
It's all counted. And obviously, if there ain't no changing of money, like taking care of your kids or volunteering or just doing housework, not counted unless you're paying someone to do it. So it does mean there is a fair bit missed out. But that being said, always fairly important to look at what's going on.
And before we get into what the figures are, I'd like to do a bit of scene setting, which you did in your column, which I very much enjoyed. You went into how the measure of household spending in the March quarter was flat. Private capital expenditure figures in the March quarter showed that investment was down. The balance on payments on Tuesday showed that our trade, so imports and exports, was down. And the figures for government spending and investment also showed that public demand for that fell in the March quarter. So looking at all of these, I'm going to guess that GDP was not doing so hot.
The Australian economy barely grew in the March quarter.
The figures have just come through and economic growth is a bit lower than expected. It is 0.2%.
Well, more rate cuts could be on the horizon this morning with the latest economic figures revealing Australia is on the brink of returning to a per capita recession.
Yeah, one of the first things you learn sort of in year 11, year 12 economics about GDP is that you calculate it by adding up C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That is household consumption, investment, government spending, and trade. And as you point out, all four of those things were pretty bad. So that doesn't leave a lot left over it. And that's why the March quarter, the Australian economy as a total grew by just 0.2%, which is rather pathetic, to use a technical term. I mean, a good way to think about it is we like to get GDP growing at about 2.8 to 3%. And, you know, if you times 0.2 by 4 to get an annual sort of growth, that's 0.8. So we're a long way below what you'd want. Really bad figures, and bad kind of because of everything, not because of one particular thing.
Well, that's just great. Bad because of everything, not because of just one particular thing.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So if you're wondering if everything was going down, why did it go up? Well, basically population growth helped us get up there. But if you take away population, do the per capita, things went backwards. And that is the 9th time out of the past 11 quarters where GDP per capita went backwards. And one of the other times it didn't go backwards, it didn't go forwards either. It was just zero. So we've had a pretty long streak of GDP per capita, and that gets a lot of attention. And I saw some people saying, "Oh, we might suddenly fall into another GDP per capita recession," which ain't really a thing.
Why isn't it a thing?
The reason why we care about GDP is because it not only accounts for all of production, but there's a really strong link with unemployment. And there's less of that when we're talking GDP per capita. And also, when GDP per capita goes down, there's often this view that, oh, we're all worse off or something's gone wrong. And it's like, no, not particularly. Like, let's think of it in this way. Let's say you and I are the entire economy.
Okay.
And you're producing 100 units of something, and it could be 100 million, 100 billion units, whatever. We'll just say 100 for easy. You're doing 100, I'm doing 100, okay? Then in the next quarter, we actually get better. We do 110 each.
Okay.
So you think, oh, great, we're going up. And our average has gone from 100 to 110. But the problem is, or we can call it a problem, someone has come into the economy, let's say a migrant, and they're working in a sector that maybe doesn't produce as much or doesn't get paid as much. Let's call it the care sector.
Yep.
And they only produce 30. Now that 30 gets added to our 2 lots of 110, but the average has gone down because it's now 110 plus 110 plus someone who's doing 30. You add that together and divide it by 3 and you go, oh, the average went down. But are you and I worse off? Are we producing less? No, we're actually producing more than we did last time. So that's why doing the averages can sometimes be a bit misleading. What has happened isn't so much that we've all started producing less on average. It's just that people have come into the economy who are producing less than the average. They're still producing stuff, but it's the average has gone down.
So GDP per capita is not so much a concern?
Look, the reason we care about GDP per capita is it's more a reflection of how strong the economy is. GDP per capita should go up because the economy should be going up.
Yeah.
If the economy is not going up by enough to even overcome population growth, then that's kind of a sign that generally the overall economy is doing poorly. But it doesn't mean we're going backwards. And I'll give you another example. Let's say, okay, we've got that same example. The two of us are making 100 units of something. The next quarter, actually, business is shit. So you're only producing 80 of something. I'm only producing 80 of something. Yes, someone has come in and producing 30 of something.
Yep.
But 80 plus 80 plus 30 is 190. Whereas last quarter, when we were both just doing 100 each, we were doing 200.
Yeah.
So the overall economy has gone from 200 to 190. That's a recession. That's everyone going backwards. And that's why when we talk about recessions, you actually talk about all GDP, not GDP per capita, because sometimes GDP per capita just goes because of changes in what's happening and who's working where and everything, not the actual production that's going on. So
looking at GDP per capita and GDP right now, how are we doing?
Well, as I say, GDP grew by just 0.2%.
Yeah.
You know, that's nothing. Essentially a bit of a rounding error, which means that we're, as our overall economy, even with people coming in and producing more, there being more people producing than there was 3 months ago, we're barely growing.
Yeah.
Which means we're kind of getting to that sense where actually there's not a lot more work being done. And when there's not a lot of more work being done, what does that imply? Probably people are getting laid off, their shift hours are being cut, or other things occurring. Now, there's a few other things that were happening in the first 3 months of this year that did affect it, that suggests that actually things aren't perhaps as bad as the figures say. We
Okay.
had cyclones in Western Australia and Queensland that caused shutdowns in mines and also hit agricultural sectors. So that was one of the reasons why there was weak growth. But again, you really have to start doing a lot of excusing and a lot of, oh, yeah, but you've got to consider this and this and this to be able to get to a point where you're saying, oh, but 0.2% growth is okay. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, the annual growth was 1.3, which, again, that's a long way from 2.8, 3% that you kind of want the economy just to be doing year in, year out. It's less than half. And that's a sign that the economy is really struggling. It's not strong. And as I say, when you've got households not spending, when you haven't got much business investment, government is cutting back a bit on investment and spending, and exports and imports aren't really helping us. That's a sign that there's a whole lot of areas of the economy that are weak, that have really been hit of late. And it's not something we can say, oh, well, it's just because there were some cyclones in
Yeah.
Queensland.
Greg, at the minutes of their May board meeting, the RBA said GDP growth has increased in the December quarter 2024, and year-ended growth looked to have picked up a little further in the March quarter. Now, Greg, are you going to disagree with the RBA here in their assessment?
It's a bit of a shock for listeners. Yes, I'm going to. I mean, all of these figures just point out to what we said back in April when the Reserve Bank did not cut rates in its April meeting, that they completely got it wrong. Because back then they were going, oh, it seems like things are picking up. And they didn't
and they
pick
did
up.
not pick up.
And then in their at their May meeting, when they did cut rates, but only by 25 basis points, they're saying, oh, okay, things didn't pick up in the March quarter, but overall we think annual growth has probably been picking up, and it went from 1.3% to 1.3%, which
I don't think that, I mean, I'm not an economist, but I don't think that that's picking up.
Yeah, so it really is a case that the Reserve Bank keeps trying to suggest that things are looking better than they are, and they're not. And look, if there's any sort of silver lining about these terrible figures, it once again takes away any, I think, real possibility that the Reserve Bank will keep rates steady in its next meeting in July. I think a cut is very much on the cards. And it's because, you look at household spending. Why is household spending crap? Because interest rates are high.
Yeah.
Because people can't afford to buy things, especially non-discretionary things, more luxury things, because they're having to spend so much on their mortgage. And what we also saw, ironically, in these figures, there was a little bit of a pickup in household spending, and one of the biggest reasons was that energy bills went up, especially in places like Queensland, because the state government rebates had fallen away, so people actually had to spend
not
money.
Really a silver lining.
No, not a good sign of household spending being strong when it's going up, because rebates are off and you're having to spend it on electricity bills.
Yeah. Well, is there any good news in the economy right now?
Look, the one good thing about the figures is that because interest rates are no longer going up, and there was a very slight fall in the spending on mortgage interest payments in the first 3 months of this year, we are seeing household living standards start improving.
Okay.
Again, this is a case where we've seen a historic fall when you look at it on a per capita basis. And as I say, that doesn't necessarily mean we've all got a lot poorer, although, again, not a great sign. But certainly there has been a big, strong increase in migration and population over the past couple of years after the pandemic. And with that, there was a fairly big drop in what we call household disposable income per capita. So that's basically how much money have we got left after we've paid our taxes and our mortgages.
Yeah.
And that had been falling. Now it's actually been rising for a little bit. And the good thing is now even on a per capita basis, it's above where it was before we went into the pandemic in real terms. So our living standards, in a sense, on average, are now higher than they were before the pandemic, which is good. Obviously, there's a lot to make up, but at least it's a sign that, because we're no longer getting smashed by interest rates, that we can start actually seeing things get better for households. Because if you look over the last, 3 years since March 2022, when the Reserve Bank started raising interest rates, basically higher mortgage repayments have accounted for about 63% of the drop in living standards.
Yeah.
Because it's just, it's
exploded.
It's
crazy.
exploded.
Yeah.
It's smashed people. So it's one of those things where people, especially during the election campaign, were on both Labor and Liberal about, what are you going to do about cost of living and falling living standards? And I was there like, well, there's one organisation that could do something really quite impactful, and they ain't running for government, but the Reserve Bank, hopefully they heed my advice this time. Please listen.
If they're listening.
Otherwise, I'm going to have to come back and shock everyone again by disagreeing with the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it.
Nearly 3 million workers on the minimum wage will receive a pay rise.
Fair Work Australia today announcing an above-inflation rise to the minimum wage.
That's a 3.5% increase, halfway between what the business community had wanted and union demands.
This decision today will be welcomed by people who keep our economy going.
But there was some other good news in the economy, Greg. We had a minimum wage increase, which was 3.5%, which was above inflation.
Yes.
Crazy.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Look, this was quite good news, I think we can say. Actually, a bit higher than I expected. I was sort of thinking, maybe they'll only do 3%. We should recap for everybody. The minimum wage is set by the Fair Work Commission. The reason why, it's not just the minimum wage as well, it's also award wages.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that happens is people on the minimum wage and on award wages generally have very little bargaining power. It's not like they can go to their employer and demand a pay rise because they can look and go, well, you've got no skills. This job doesn't need any skills. I can replace you really quickly. So you're suddenly asking for more money. Sorry. I don't need to hire you anymore. And so because of that, historically, Australia has had in place the award process and the national minimum wage and various different organisations. Now it's the Fair Work Commission. Each year they decide how much to raise it. And they take submissions from unions, from business organisations and lobbyists, and they weigh up all the evidence.
Yeah.
And historically, business groups argue for never more than a wage rise of more than inflation.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of criticism of the wage rise from business group leaders. Innes Willicks, the Australian Industry Group chief executive, said, by giving insufficient attention to the well-established link between real wages and productivity, this decision will further suppress private sector investment and employment generation at a time our economy can least afford it.
Look, again, a bit of shock for listeners. Business groups every year complain that the increase in the minimum wage and award wage is going to send everything to the wall and destroy the economy.
Yeah.
Last year it went up by 3.75%. This year, 3.5%.
Yeah.
And unemployment stayed at 4.1%.
Yeah.
And inflation actually came down during that period. So, yeah, they're loving to talk about productivity at the moment, which
Wait, can you define what productivity means to economists, I suppose, in this way?
Basically productivity is how much you produce per hour of work.
Yep.
Like how much you produce, how many things essentially you produce per hour of work with the equipment that you've got. So 2 ways you can improve productivity. You could just produce more yourself. You go to work and you go, I'm going to really put my head down and work harder. Or, and this is the overriding way in which it can be done, is businesses can go, that shitty old computer you've been using that freezes every 2 hours? We've actually bought a new one that doesn't freeze, works well, And we've linked it up with every other computer in the office, and so you're actually able to communicate with each other and work out, and there's no repetition of stuff. And wow, we're all more productive because we've invested in equipment. And the other more long-term one is you get a lot more educated at doing your job.
Yeah.
You have more skills, so you're actually able to do things better, but that's a lot more long-term thing. Now, businesses love to talk about that because at the moment productivity has been falling. Now, there's a number of reasons for that, and one of them is, again, we've had kind of a real abnormal increase in population, which affects productivity. And one of the sort of weird things about that is if we'd wanted productivity grow, one of the ways we could have had that is actually unemployment to rise, so we had fewer people doing the jobs. I don't know if that is a great outcome.
No.
But also businesses love it because it's a nice excuse for them to not give people a pay rise, because traditionally the economic formula for wage rises is inflation plus productivity equals a wage rise. So historically you want about 2.5% inflation and you want about 1% growth in productivity. So 2.5 plus 1 equals 3.5. And when you've got that, that means you've got a wage rise that is not inflationary because, yes, it's above inflation, but we're producing 1% more than we were, with our time. So actually it's not inflationary at all. Now, when productivity is falling, business like, oh, no, we can't afford above CPI or above inflation wage rise. And the thing is, well, hang on, we've had about 20 years of pretty good or fairly okay productivity growth, and wage rises have not matched that.
Yeah.
So someone's been getting the benefit from it.
So this is just playing catch up, really.
Yeah. And, businesses, even back when productivity was growing, were still saying, oh, no, we can't have wage rises above inflation. So it's just a convenient excuse. Also, who are the workers we're talking about here? Again, we're talking about Australia's lowest paid workers, which generally not highly skilled often. Is it their fault that they haven't been more productive, or is it the fact that business groups have actually been pretty useless at investing in equipment, investing in better work practices or things like
or
that?
Training.
So, training. And I think it's actually quite a good decision. And also you have to have the context of the fact that during that period in 22, 23, when inflation skyrocketed, the minimum wage and award wages went up by a lot less than inflation. So it means that even with this 3.5% wage rise, I was calculating that workers on award wages are getting paid about 1% less than they were back in 2020 in real terms.
Yeah.
So their wage buys 1% less tan it did 5 years ago. So it's like, really, you think this is excessive?
Yeah.
And, as I say, remember who we're talking about here. We're talking about 20% of workers, but 20% of the lowest paid workers in Australia. That accounts for around 11% of all wages in Australia because it's well below average. It's a pretty crucial thing that helps reduce poverty, and I'd be more than happy to listen to the business groups' complaints if they didn't say it every year, regardless of what was going.
Yep.
And finally, on the productivity thing, a really, really crucial thing in the Fair Work Commission's decision was they noted that for all this talk about productivity, the main reason that they were able to find, and they were sort of going off some really good economics from the ACTU here, was that the fall in productivity is mostly due to what we call the non-market sectors, things like care work, things like education, which are incredibly hard to measure. Like, how do you measure productivity in an aged care home?
Just more people. I don't know.
But is it like, okay,
But then,
we're employing 3 people to work this shift. Now we're only employing 2.5 or 2 people to do that shift. Yeah, it's more productive, but is it?
Is the level of care the same?
Yeah, exactly. It's really hard. Whereas when it's cars coming off an assembly line, it's really quite easy to measure productivity. You can measure sort of the goodness of the car and how many gadgets it's got all in it, and how many are coming off every hour, and how many people are being employed to do that. But with care work, with even the service sectors in retail and things like that, it's, you can do how many tables is a waiter serving in an hour, or how many dishes is a chef doing, but are the dishes good? Is the service good? It's really tricky. And so economists sometimes fool themselves into saying, oh, well, this measure of productivity that we basically devised at a time when most of the economy was manufacturing and construction is still relevant now that most of the economy is services. And the Fair Work Commission is going, I don't know about that. And so, they kind of dismiss these concerns of productivity.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've probably just got a little bit of time for a quick tariff corner.
Woohoo!
Do we have any updates in Tariffland?
Yes.
I've not been paying attention to the news because I know that I can get you to just tell me.
It all revolves around tacos.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week.
A journalist asked Trump about Wall Street traders doing these taco trades, and Trump was like, what's that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that like chicken out? I've never heard that. 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. Don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question.
She pointed out what taco stands for Trump always chickens out. And that's because he does. I mean, as we pointed out, he's raised tariffs. Then it's like, oh, no, I'm lowering them. And he never follows through. But, of course, you just knew that Trump's ego could not handle this.
No.
And so, not surprisingly, very soon after, a couple of days later, I think it was, he went to Pittsburgh and announced that
we are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. Nobody's going to get around that.
Again, yes, it'll hurt Australian steel producers. About 33% of Australian exports of steel go to the US.
Oh, that's pretty sizable.
And a much smaller percent goes to the US of aluminium. But overall, our exports of steel and aluminium to the US are very small in the grand scheme of things.
Yep.
We export pretty much about as much wine and beer and spirits to the US as we do steel.
Okay.
So, it's not like this is going to cripple our economy or anything because, one, again, they apply to everyone. And it's not like suddenly all these steel mills are going to be built in America because if you are a steel maker, you're looking there and going, Trump's probably going to chicken out again.
Yeah.
So why would I spend, 2-3 years building a steel mill, all the money that's involved there? All it's doing is, again, hurting manufacturing in America. It's probably the best way you could think to actually hurt manufacturing in America. Well done, Trump.
Yep, well done.
So that's where we are. We're now back in the taco tariffs.
Great.
And all the joy that comes with that.
Well, that's probably all we've got time for today, Greg. Thanks
so
much.
Elinor, thank you. It's great to be back. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be back with another episode next week. I have no idea what it's going to be about, so sorry, no spoilers. But this episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on Thursday, the 5th of June, and some things may have changed. My column on all the GDP figures with all the graphs can be found on the Guardian Australia site. And for more research and opinion and commentary and graphs aplenty, you can find on our website, australiainstitute.org.au. There's been some really good stuff of late, even just about the whole election and the fact that for the first time ever, either the ALP or the LNP actually got fewer votes than independents and minor parties. Independents and minor parties got more votes than the Liberal and National Party did this time. So some really good research by our colleague Sky. So please do have a gander at our website. Music, as always, is by Blue Dot Sessions. Everyone, have a great week, and we will see you all next week.
See ya.